Christian parenting.
This is Cynthia Yanoff, and you're listening to Pardon the Mess. Each week we have honest discussions about the ups and downs of parenting and the lessons God is teaching us along the way. It's real, it's fun, and it's biblical. Life is messy. Don't walk the parenting road alone. Hey friends, welcome to Pardon the Mess. Glad you're joining us today. It is November, which is National Adoption Month. And if you know anything about me and my family, we are really big on adoption and foster care, very near and dear to our hearts. And so I'm thankful that we are kicking off November by talking to Sam Collier. And Sam Collier has an amazing adoption story. He was born into a biological situation with drugs, with poverty, and was adopted. And his story of God rescripting his life is amazing. Here's a little spoiler alert. When his adoptive parents went to consider adopting he and his sister, they were told that they might not want those two kids because they probably won't amount to much. And look how God proved that wrong. He's just got an amazing ministry. Sam's now a pastor, a speaker, a writer, host of A Greater Story with Sam Collier. It's a TV show and radio podcast that airs in more than 100 million homes. 100 million. And so what I love about Sam is that he just has a word, not only just for those who are going through adoption or have been adopted, but for everybody about God rescripting our lives for his bigger purposes. And so as we kick off November, I would just love on a personal note for everyone just to pray for adoption and foster care, what that means in your life. I don't believe that everybody is called into that lane, but I believe lots of us are that haven't taken that leap. And I also believe we're all called to help in some way, whether that's helping to finance someone who wants to adopt, maybe internationally or locally. Also, foster care, there's so many different ways to help. Respite care for babysitting, just lots of different ways to be involved. So just pray through that this month. That would mean a lot to me and my family. There's just a huge need. But I'm glad you're here today. We are kicking it off with Sam Collier. Hey, Sam Collier, welcome to Pardon the Mess.
I'm so excited to be here. How are you?
I'm good. I'm hanging in there. What about you?
You know, COVID-19, it just, the moment you feel like it's going to stop, it keeps going. And, you know, it's like a really long dance.
With a partner you never really wanted to dance with.
Exactly. You're like, when is this song going to end? Oh my, when is this?
And then it turns into a slow dance. You thought said yes to a fast dance, and
right.
it will not end.
It won't end. But I'm, you know, in spite of the challenge, which I know we'll talk about today, I've tried to focus on the unique opportunities in this season that just come with being at home all the time and, you know, being a little more isolated.
Yeah. And so you live in Atlanta, right? With a wife and a daughter.
Yes, which means it's like we never know when she's going to leave. She's never going to leave us. She's going to be in the house forever.
How old is she?
She's 5. So you know about that lifestyle because you have a 4-year-old.
I do. Yeah. And a high schooler and a middle schooler. And so as I like to say, it never ends. Some stay up half the night. Some get up at the crack of dawn. There's somebody with me at every given second, except when I'm podcasting. So if I just stay on here for 2 to 3 hours with you, we don't even have to talk. We can just enjoy the silence and call it work.
Yeah, let's just keep going. And then we'll act like we'll end. And then we'll act like we're still going. You take a nap, do what you need to do. Yeah. I'll leave my Zoom open.
You're awesome. You're awesome. Well, I'm excited about your book, and it's called A Greater Story. Yeah. And I know that you speak all over the place and do all kinds of media work. And I think it's so cool to be able to see how when people have these really remarkable stories of God's hand, it comes from a really hard place. And I know being a parenting podcast, we spend so much of our time blocking the hard places from our kids, doing everything we know to keep them from having to experience the hard places. And we don't wish any abuse or tragedy on our children whatsoever, obviously. But it's really cool to see when we get to see it this side of heaven, how God uses those hard places to redeem them. And so I'm excited for you to share that with us. So just kick us off with a little bit of your background.
Wow. What a question. First of all, I think it's an honor to be on a parenting podcast because my parents that adopted me and my twin sister were and are our heroes.
Mm.
My dad, who adopted us, he's 84 now. He adopted us when he was 50. My mother is around 73. She has Alzheimer's. That's a recent phenomenon in the last kind of 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to think that they gave so much of their life, especially my mother, really her entire life, to us, and my dad, the rest of his life he gave to make sure that we would be okay, is just astounding. So to every parent out there that's listening, I just want to say, you have the opportunity to be a hero. And I mean, many of you are, if you listen to this podcast, you're a hero. It is what it is. You've decided to leverage your life and your story to make a difference for those that didn't choose to come into this world, but that are here. My mother, biological mother, was 21 when she had me and my twin sister. She had 3 kids already. That's 5 kids age 21.
Wow.
And extreme poverty, welfare. And our biological father was addicted to drugs, crack, cocaine, and left the picture. So here she is in the hospital at age 21, having to make a decision. I don't have enough money to take care of the 3 kids that I already have. Do I raise the 2 in poverty?
Yeah.
Or do I give them up for adoption and hope and pray that God would create a miracle? And we did get adopted. 2 months later, a couple who had just met in DC, my dad 50, right? 50 something.
Wow.
And my mother, roughly maybe around 30 or late 30s. They meet in a laundromat at 3 p.m. and they both are in the middle of a divorce. My dad's second divorce and my mother's only divorce, first divorce, married to a very abusive man. And actually she was in the laundromat because the night before she had been hit in the head with a hammer by him. And so she was at the laundromat because she needed an alibi, because she had decided that by any means necessary, she had to get out of the situation and she was going to go kill him because, there was no other way out for her. She saw him. She met my dad in this laundromat and didn't go kill her ex-husband, but they both walk out together and start dating. And they realized that they had lived their life long enough without Jesus. So they give their life over to Jesus, they give their life over to God. They get married. They find out my mother can't have kids. They come down from Washington, D.C. to Augusta, Georgia, walk over to our crib, and they decide that they want us. The lady who's running the adoption agency says, you don't want them. They're probably not going to be much. We know this is your opportunity to do it right. You've given your life to Christ, but they're probably going to be mentally challenged and they probably won't be much because of where they come from. Crack, addiction. They traced a lot of my mother's steps back to prostitution houses. Don't know if she was prostituting or if she was just living there. And they, took a moment away from the lady who was running the home and they prayed in the adoption home, God, what do you want us to do? And they said that the Lord told them that we would be okay, that we were supposed to be their kids. They adopt us anyway, bring us home. Long story short, we grew up in a middle-class family. I grew up down on Auburn Avenue across from the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, where MLK and Coretta Scott King's tombs sit above ground as we speak.
Wow.
And they raise us in this middle-class Christian home. My sister gets all A's from kindergarten up to 12th grade, becomes an industrial engineer, dual scholarship to Spelman and Georgia Tech. Wow. And I'm here on the Pardon the Mess podcast. I mean,
you have arrived, my friend.
Right? And the many things that you talked about, television. I mean, we've reached millions with the message of hope and a greater story with the podcast and all of that. And here I am. A couple moments after that, God, he'd already rewritten our story. Even if that wasn't enough, he decides about 4 years or maybe 5 to 6 years after, obviously, my sister graduates and all these other things, that he would break the rule that he set for one of our family traditions. which I don't know if this is one of your family's traditions, but NFL football is a family tradition.
Oh gosh. I mean, second only to Jesus with the male in my house. My husband, I have a couple males, but especially for my husband, but yes.
NFL football. And so he's got one rule. Nobody talks during the game. If you talk, you got to leave. So he breaks the rule. And he looks at me and my sister on a commercial break and he says, "It's time for you to go find your parents." And we said, "What?" I mean, out of nowhere, random, age 24. He said, "Well, you could grow up one day and marry your cousin and you would never know it."
Deep thoughts.
Right. I'm like, that's your argument, right? And he's like, and another thing, Steve Harvey is going to help you do it. I said, okay, he's lost his mind. And
oh my gosh,
here's what we found out. You know, he had a barbershop on Auburn. So that's why we grew up in Auburn. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Barbershop before, maybe some commercials.
Yes.
With Ice Cube, but it's, kind of the black barbershop is kind of the central focal point, right, for the black male in the black community. And you kind of do the same thing at the black barbershop every day if you work there. You cut hair, you eat, you take a couple naps, and you watch TV. And so every day he watched the Steve Harvey Show after Steve took Oprah's slot. And he said that the Lord told him while he was watching the show one day that Steve Harvey was going to help us find our family. Well, after he said this, after he said this to us as we were, watching football, I just got up and left because I thought he had lost his mind. 2 weeks later, he convinces my sister to write into the show. I asked her why she wrote in. She said, well, I mean, he just kept yelling because he's kind of from the country. So he said, you need to write in, you need to write in. Not all country people sound like that, but that's how my dad said.
Okay.
And so a year goes by, my phone rings. It's my sister. I answered the phone, my twin, and she says, the Steve Harvey Show just called me. They're going to call you. Bye. And hangs up the phone.
My gosh.
And so my phone rings again. It's the Steve Harvey Show. I said, hello. She said, hey, this is Dorothy from the Steve Harvey Show. I said, hey, Dorothy, how are you? She said, well, this is my first week on the job. I used to work at Jerry Springer. I said, now, wait a minute. Right. What are we? She said, there's 100 stories on my desk. Yours is the top story. We think we can help you find your parents. Do you want to do it? I said, well, let me call you back. I called my sister. I said, hey, do you want to do this? My sister says, no, but I feel like we have to. Long story short, they fly us all up to Chicago, me, my sister, my adoptive parents, and they bring us on the show. They say, we're so sorry we couldn't find anyone, but we want to bring you on to make a plea. And so we, the cameras happen, and then we go to commercial break. Earth, Wind, and Fire comes on during the commercial break because Steve Harvey is just being crazy and singing to the audience. After the commercial break, he sits down. He says, I know I told you we didn't find your birth mother, but that's not the case. Eleanor, come on out.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Okay. So Eleanor comes on out.
She comes out. We meet our biological mother for the first time after 25 years on the show. And then he says, oh, and your siblings are here too. And then they walk out. That's the story. That's the story.
And so, I mean, I could sit here for days and ask you questions, but I guess what comes to mind, and I think most people would say, is did that relationship continue with your mom and your siblings? And was that a good thing? Are you glad you did what you did, or how did that play out for you?
Well, because this is a parenting podcast and because you have adopted a kid as well, I'm going to be honest. More honest than other shows.
Okay.
No, I've been honest in most, but this one I feel like we'll go deeper. My dad was right. It was time. I am very glad that it happened when I was 24 and not when I was 14, because I was still learning who I was. I had a pretty solid foundation by 24. He was right. I needed to learn about just basic things like what kind of illnesses run in the family. And, found out my biological father, obviously he had diabetes. So that's something to look out for. I was able to understand more about the story. All of the stuff that I was telling you now, I never knew. I didn't know that I was born into this extreme poverty. I didn't know our dad was this. I didn't, so that was very important for me in understanding why God decided to do what he did in terms of pulling us out. It was an interruption in our bloodline. Now, my sister did not react the same way I reacted, to say the least. I believe that, she said she did it mostly for me, which I told her, we could do whatever she wanted to do because I would have been fine either way. She said she did it for me because she felt like, TV, all these things. But I think if she had to do it all over again, I don't know that she would.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I would, but I don't know that she would, based off of, I think, the emotions. And because for all intents and purposes, there was kind of, it was kind of dormant. I mean, we were fine. We actually didn't have any desire, nor did we have, not the desire to meet anyone, because our parents were just, again, middle class. They weren't rich at all. We had everything that we needed. We didn't have everything we wanted. They weren't perfect, but they were persevering. They did the best they could, and it was awesome. And so because of that, we were fine. It probably would not have been until I was 50 maybe that I said, I should probably figure this out, but just because I would be curious. And so I don't know that she would necessarily go back. And so, because we had to start unpacking a lot of things that we never even thought about.
Right.
And the biggest battle for me was, where do I put you? Mm-hmm. Because you can't go in the mom space. That's already filled. Can't go in dad space. That's already filled. Siblings, it's a little easier, but you want to honor your mom, the one that raised you, but you also are trying to figure out, well, where do I put you? So it took me a little second to kind of get my bearings.
You didn't meet your bio dad though, right? Just your mom at that point and siblings?
I met my mom and the siblings on the show. My dad called me about 3 weeks after that.
So
still,
have some communication with everybody.
Yeah, but I never met him in person. I don't know if I mentioned he died from COVID-19 about 3 months ago.
I'm sorry, didn't know.
No, it's fine. He still addicted to drugs. He died because he had diabetes. Was in the hospital in New York. Left the hospital to go get drugs. Contracted COVID-19 and passed away. And so talked to him twice. And so I think. That was the biggest thing, figuring out where to put them.
When going back to like what you mentioned earlier, you're glad that you didn't do it when you were 14. Were there times in there though, during those years, maybe the teen years or those years where you struggled a little bit, even growing up in a strong Christian home, just kind of wondering like, how could God let this happen? Or why does my story not look like everybody else's story? Or were you just one of those unique kids that came from a place of gratitude for what the Lord did do versus the things that did not look how traditionally one might have wanted him to look?
Yeah. I never had a thought, and maybe my sister did, but I don't think she did either. She, based on our conversations, but it is because of my adoptive dad, my dad, who I call my dad, and mom, obviously, but they were so big on living in the present, and they were so loving that we never had a reason to think, why did we end up here? And I think it was because one of the biggest things is the story they told us from the beginning of our lives. And you've got a 4-year-old. I remember maybe I was 2 or 3, and they always told us we were adopted. Always. Yeah. You're adopted. But, you're 3 and 4, so it's like Disneyland. They're like, you're adopted. They're like yelling about it. They were excited about us. So then we got excited about it. We were like, we're adopted. And, and their story was, we think your mother couldn't take care of you. We think she was poor. And so now we're here. And so they became like the Disney heroes.
Yeah.
And we could understand heroes because we watched Disney. So then we felt like every time we watched Cinderella, you know what I'm saying? Or some Disney movie, that we were the characters in the story, that, oh my gosh, we got rescued and so on and so forth. And so I think that narrative stayed with us. And then my dad was he was just a no nonsense person as it pertains to worrying about what you didn't get.
Mm-hmm.
He was just so big on, it's not about the cards you've been dealt, it's about how you play the hand. And I think had we even thought for a moment, well, they didn't want us, or it would be like, what? That doesn't matter. We want you, and we're with you, and you're our family. And it is what it is. Like, who cares? We love you. You could spend your time thinking about what you don't have, or you could spend your time focused on what you do and make the best of right now. So I think he was always success minded for us. Like, hey, go and be something. That's the best. Go and be great. That's what we want you to do. Yeah. And so we never even drifted into, well, what about ever? So that's one of the reasons why he had to initiate it. It was his idea. Hey, y'all need to go.
Yeah. And so you've seen how God just rescripted your life and your sister's life, obviously. And I love how it's kind of your mantra as a greater story. It's not just the book that you've written, but it's kind of all that you do, podcasts, otherwise. Why? Maybe it's not a why question, but I was going to say, why are you so passionate about sharing the story? And I don't think it's a why as much as why are you so passionate that other people see how God rescripts stories? Because it's so evident in your story, can't miss it. And even as a mom who's adopted a little one out of foster care, your story is not lost on me. But you're passionate about making sure that people understand God's goodness and that he's in the business of rescripting and that he takes the hard places and makes them something. And so speak into that a little bit. Where do you come from, that place, and how important is it for you to speak it?
Yeah, I think, we started the campaign based on the story and the brand and the mantra, based on the idea that when your story connects to God's story, it leads to a greater story. So we tried to put it in a statement. A good friend of mine, Jeff Henderson, birthed the statement, who used to work at Chick-fil-A corporate in sports marketing. So he has a marketing brain. When your story connects to God's story, leads to a greater story, to get the idea and the strategy in front of people in a way that they can remember. But it's so huge for me because, one, I believe in the power of God rewriting our stories. The idea that we are not, and that we don't have to be victims of the darkness that is all around us every single day. The Bible says that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly and have it to the full. That is a promise. That is a desire. That is something that God is trying to communicate to us, is the goal, that you would have life to the full. He wants to give that to every single one of us. And that doesn't mean perfection, but it does mean a couple of things. It means it'll be definitely better than what it is now. And he'll give us the ability to have the strength to make it through the imperfection. It is a life with God. And for many of us, if not all of us, that means him doing great things through our lives. He has that available for all of us. If we will reach for more, and if we will leverage everything we have for the sake of the kingdom and of the gospel, he will use our life to make a difference. And that's all we're living for, right? We're living to be significant, and he has that significance for us. Also, God does not want us to live a life without the resources that we need to be everything he's called us to be. Poverty was not God's idea. With the revelation of Christ, and when we let God into our lives, he has the ability and wants to deliver us from the darkness. He wants to deliver us from lack. We're not talking about prosperity gospel. We're not talking about getting rich. We're talking about having the resources that we need to be everything that God wants us to be. And he wants to use us to do great things. And that's just not specific to me. That's specific to every single person on the earth, no matter where you are. And how do I know? I've got a friend out of Nairobi, Kenya, who grew up in the worst parts of Kenya, on the outskirts. When you think about poverty, you think about, the lowest extreme poverty is huts, right? He's living in a hut in the slums of Kenya. He would have to walk 2 to 3 miles to get water every day, no electricity. I mean, it's extreme poverty. You can't go lower than this. And he now runs one of the largest nonprofits in Nairobi, Kenya. They got a staff of 200.
Wow.
And you ask yourself, whoa, how did that happen? Well, he gave his life to Christ, and he started to believe that through God, he could do more. And God pulled him out of that situation by his own effort. I asked him the question one day. I said, he had 8 brothers and sisters, and many of them are still living in hut. I said, what's the difference between you and them? He said, I just decided there was more and that God could do more. A greater story is available for all of us. And I wanted to leverage my story to show people this is how it works. This is one of the main ways that God could do it. But he has a unique way for you as well. So I'm so passionate because there's a greater life for all of us.
Hey friends, jumping in here for just a minute to thank Faithful Counseling for sponsoring our podcast today. I want to read you one of the reviews on Faithful Counseling that I saw online. It says, the counseling has been a total blessing to my life and to the state of my mental health. My counselor is well versed in many methods and practices, yet relies on the Spirit to guide him into the right practice at the right time. This is just one of the many people that are benefiting from the services of Faithful Counseling. Faithful Counseling is secure, online, professional counseling. It's available worldwide. You can log onto your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. You'll receive thoughtful and timely messages, but you can also schedule weekly video or phone sessions. Faithful Counseling is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they'll make it easy and free to change counselors if you need to. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling. So go to faithfulcounseling.com/pardonthemess and receive 10% off your first month of counseling. Again, it's faithfulcounseling.com/pardonthemess.
There's somebody that's probably listening that definitely doesn't have your story, but has a story of some suffering or just maybe some significantly unanswered prayer or some hard places in their life, and they haven't seen God's hand on that yet. And again, his ways are higher than our ways. We don't have all the answers by any means. But what's your encouragement to someone that may feel like, that God isn't with them in this, or that he's abandoned them, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think what I would say to them is, if God hasn't done anything great through your life, 9 times out of 10, there's something else for you to discover about God. 9 times out of 10, there's something that you don't see that if you saw it would change everything. 9 times out of 10, there's a belief system that is still in place in your mind that is keeping you from the greater thing. The question, though, becomes, what does greater look like? And for every one of us, it's something different. You could be living in greater right now, but not recognize it as greater because you have your idea of the American dream. You may be chasing after riches or this, and that's not what God defines as great. What he defines as great is significance, reaching high, leveraging everything you have for the sake of the gospel, and him using it to be better. God may never move the mountain, but he might use you with the mountain there to help other people move their mountain. There's so many things that he could do. I would start chasing significance as opposed to success. And if you can chase significance as opposed to success, it is out of that place of significance for the sake of the kingdom that more is granted unto you. We have the parable. We know God likes to grow things. We know he likes to do more because we have the passage in scripture that talks about the man with the talents with 1 and the man with the talents with 5 and 10. The one with 5 took it and turned it into 10. The one with 10 turned it into 20. And the one who had the 1 didn't do anything, and God took it away. In other words, God was not pleased with him because he didn't grow. So we know that God is growth-minded, so which means that he wants to grow your capacity and he wants to grow your world. You're going, God, do something. I want you to use me. Why haven't you? Maybe he doesn't want to. No, he wants to. And that's the first step, believing that he wants to do more with your life. And then the second step is looking at what's in your hands and multiplying that. But here's where the caveat is. You can't multiply something that he doesn't want you to multiply. And that's the biggest key. And that's another reason why some people may not see. And in the book, I break this down of how you truly discover what purpose is and what it is that God has already put in your hands that he wants you to multiply. I give a 3-step formula to purpose because it's a mystery for many of us. But in it, that's the caveat. Many people are spending their time trying to multiply something that God hadn't put his hand on, and it never grows because it's not what he wants you to grow in. But if you'll discover or surrender to that thing that he has already placed his hands on that is in your hands, it'll be astronomical. I think for you, it was the Pardon the Mess podcast, right? And there were so many other things that you've already discovered that now he's multiplied. And I'm sure there were things that you did before now that didn't work. I mean, right?
For sure.
And for me as well, I thought I was going to be the Christian version of Usher. We don't need to go down that road, but that's what I thought I was going to be.
Well, if that ever turns out, I wish you the best because that would be a real cool place to be.
Right. I mean, that's what I wanted for years, and it just never worked. And I worked so hard, but the key was it wasn't what he had for me. Yeah. Now, and I could have been in that place and got to your point and said, "Man, God isn't doing great things, and He doesn't want great things." But I didn't stop there. I said, "Well, maybe it's not God, maybe it's me." And I paused for a minute and said, "God, what do you want me to do? Because I'm doing this and it seems like you're not here. Why don't you show me?" And he led me through a series of decisions and through sermons and revelations immediately from that point that allowed for me to see what he wanted me to do. And I surrendered, changed my whole life. And now I'm in the ministry and he's multiplied it.
Amazing. Amazing. And so you talk about something that's, I think, such a good parenting lesson too. And you don't necessarily speak to it in the parenting context, but you're a dad, so I know it's there. But I talk to my kids about this a lot, that when God's no is not always it's not a no, it's you talk about rejection versus protection. Yeah. And sometimes God says no for our protection, not to hurt us, not for any other reason, because he doesn't want what's best for us, but it is utter protection. And so I tell my kids on the simple things, like if you didn't make that team that we've tried our whole life, then let's not, that may have been just God's no, but it's most likely him protecting in some form or fashion. Mm-hmm. If you want to be usher kids, and I can promise you right now, Sam, that the Yanoff children are not going to be ushers, Christian ushers, but God has, he's designed us and created us from the womb. He's known us all of our days, what they entail before we were ever born. And he has this great, mighty plan for our lives. And a lot of the way, it's that guiding. It's the kid putting us in the guardrails and saying no to this and no to this because I want you to have my best, and working through that. And so has that been kind of a resounding theme that you've seen in your life with the Lord as you've gone through this and trying to not only your greater story, but you interview a lot of people about their greater story. Yeah. Do you see that a lot of just redefining what punishment is or rejection that you feel like maybe the Lord's giving you versus his protection?
100%. What I've been saying lately is where you decide to look will determine what you see. Where you decide to look will determine what you see. If you decide to internalize God's no as him punishing you, then you'll see it as a punishment. Mm-hmm. But if you decide to look at it as protection, you'll see it as protection. And in other words, we can tell ourselves any story that we want to tell ourselves, and that can become our reality. I find that through the scriptures, the reality and the belief and the concept that is more congruent with the gospel is protection rather than his rejection or rather than his punishment, because it says that he's good. And if I believe he's good, then I believe that everything that he does for me is ultimately for my greater good. But for those that don't believe he's good, just as a foundation, again, what you decide to look at is what will determine what you see. Then you'll look at everything that he does in your life as a punishment, or as this, or he doesn't love me, or he doesn't do this. And so I think for me, the foundation of understanding and deciding, no, God is good all the time. His good may not be understandable for me in the moment, because I don't understand fully everything that he's trying to do, but I know that he has my best interest at heart. And so I'm going to decide to maybe see what I don't see. And so for me, that I think that's what it has become. It's, God's knows our protection for me. It's not his rejection of me. It's his protection for me because, and here's the biggest thing, as it pertains to especially purpose, he has already created us to be who we are. In other words, we are already who we are to be. Sometimes God has to say no because we're veering off the path in which he's created us. He knows that if we can become who he's created us to be, that we will live out our optimum capacity because he's already created us to be that. As soon as I surrendered to ministry, I realized, wait a minute, I have been prepared for this my entire life. God has created me for this my entire life. And now my life is better. It's easier. And I'm at more peace as opposed to trying to do something that I haven't been wired to do. So I just learned to trust God. At the core of a greater story in this whole concept is the thought and the idea of surrender. Surrender. At every turn, surrender. Surrender my thoughts to his will. Surrender my options to his options. Surrender my choices to his choices. Surrender. And if we can do that, it is the number one thing that will always connect our story to his story and will ultimately lead to a greater story if we can do it.
That's so good. That's so good. And just an encouragement for those listening, I love how you're talking about God's goodness. Don't let your current circumstances or realities eclipse what you know to be about God being good and for us and our protector and our provider. And we have, and you may not see it because we live in a temporal world, but we have this beautiful gospel. We have a beautiful Bible to go back to. And Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego probably weren't feeling it when they were in the furnace,
right.
God's goodness. And, Jonah, in the whale, Noah you look at these places, even the Israelites who are complaining and they hate the manna. And why'd you bring us into the desert to kill us when we could? But we have the benefit of seeing God's bigger rescripted story. And I think that's what I love about yours, Sam, is that you've got this bigger story that this side of eternity, we get to see how God is using it in an amazing way. And he takes what was never meant to be, what was never his best intentions for families, but that he's using you for his glory and encouraging others. So what an amazing testimony. Just thanks for sharing it.
Listen, this is just incredible. Again, I told you, this is just one of my greatest honors. I don't get a chance to do parenting podcasts often or to talk to someone who actually can understand fully what I'm going through because you have a kid. You're raising a little me right now. And I'm just so grateful, one, for your sacrifice and what you're doing. And I know you don't need it. And you're like, it's not about me, it's about him. Yeah. But I like to spend time just talking to parents that sacrifice for someone they didn't have to.
Yeah.
Because
that's sweet. Thank you.
It changed my life. Yeah. There is a thing as nature versus nurture. And that nurturing environment, it is so important to help create the foundation for someone to discover fully who God has created them to be. And that's what you're doing for your son. I mean, it's powerful. And I am the direct result of a family and of two individuals and two people. That's another reason why I wrote this book, to honor them that gave up so much of their life to make sure that I became what God wanted me to become. And it wasn't easy because I was crazy a lot of times, but I want to encourage you, and I want to encourage every parent out there who has adopted and who's thinking about it, and say that you are a life changer.
What a sweet word. Well, and the beauty of adoption and raising kids from hard places is just knowing, one, that you can let go of the little stuff. My sweet little one has a speech delay. And the other day someone said, "You're very calm about this." And I said, listen, if God can get him from where he was to us and rework against all odds what his future would have been, then I feel confident he can get him talking. Like, that's the least of our worries over here. So it really does give new perspective. And it's just such an honor when you can see how the Lord allows you to be a part of his greater story. So Thank you for sharing with us. And before we even, I'll tell everybody listening, before we even started recording, I told Sam, I'm like, you're officially one of my people. You're on my speed dial because I'm going to need you someday. I am raising a little you.
You are. Call me. I'm in.
God willing, the Lord will just do mighty things in his little life too. So thanks for being here. And you guys, the book is called A Greater Story. We're excited about it. Everybody grab your copy. And then, hey, Sam, tell them also a little bit about how to keep up with you, like, your podcast or your social. Give them a little of your info.
100%. Listen, I definitely want to echo what you said. Listen, get the book. If you are in a period in your life where you're trying to figure out how to connect your story to God's, if you're looking for greater, which I think we all are in the midst of COVID-19, get it. Listen, hit me up at agreaterstory.org, not .com, agreaterstory.org. And one, you can find the book there. We have links to Amazon, links to Barnes & Noble, all that. But you can also find my socials. I'm Sam Collier on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. Just type it in, you'll find me. And if we're doing our job right on Google, you should be able to just type it in Google and some things can pop up. But if you're like, listen, I just want it to be convenient and you're an Amazon Prime person, get the book on Amazon Prime. It'll come the very next day. But hit me up, send me some messages, and just let me know how God is moving in your story. And I just so appreciate being on this platform.
Wow, we're glad you're here. Hey, I have to ask you one other real quick thing. Yeah. You've interviewed a ton of cool people, and I hate when people ask me this, but when you've been interviewing people for The Greater Story, give us one that's been one of your favorites.
Oh, wow. One of my favorite interviews. I interviewed Lecrae. He was a favorite.
I saw that, yeah.
Andy Stanley was a favorite, and Lisa TerKeurst was a favorite as well.
Okay.
Lecrae specifically was a favorite because he talked about his depression. He talked about going through some hard times. Him and Tadashi lost his son, and they just got so vulnerable. And you really don't see that a lot in the public eye, especially from young Black men, just get that vulnerable about their hardships and how God had to walk them through it. It was really inspiring and encouraging.
It's awesome. Okay. Well, y'all look him up and listen to Sam's podcast and read his book. So thanks for being here. I'm so glad to meet you.
You are amazing.
All right. How about that, Sam Collier? I love what God's done in his life. I love that he talks about the greater story, God's greater story, and interviews people on his podcast, his show, talking about that. But wow, did God rescript his life. And the Steve Harvey story is awesome. It cracks me up. And I also love that he wanted to be usher. I mean, who wouldn't want to be able to dance like that? I hope you'll follow him. I also hope that you'll just take a little time this month and just pray through foster care. Just pray for those that are in foster care. Pray for those that want to adopt, that need to be adopted, and just ask the Lord what your role might be in that. Reach out to me anytime. Love to talk foster care and adoption. Cynthia@christianparenting.org. We know your days are busy, so as always, thank you for joining us as we pardon the mess.